Welcome to r/slash Nuclearrevenge, where an abuser gets murdered. So this happened back in high school, involving one very dear friend and his manic sociopath of a buddy. Let me outline the cast of this beautiful production. First, there was our victim, who was possibly just the nicest dude I have ever encountered in my life. I'll call him Nice Dude. His home life was pretty good, while it was just him and his mother. His mother was incredibly busy, working a very high-paying job to give him a comfortable life. And as such, she wasn't home often. So to make up for that, and to assure her son was living comfortably, she provided him with an insane weekly allowance. Like $500 insane. And so, of course, being a teenager with more expendable income than he knew what to do with, he constantly blew it on weed, electronics, and nice clothes. Despite his comfortable living situation, he was by and large just a great dude. Always spent money on his friends, shared his weed, had movie nights. Honestly, I think he just felt a little lonely and wanted to share what he had with people he cared about. Then, we have the agent of chaos in this story. We'll call this absolute effing maverick Horse, due to an equally illogical high school nickname that he demanded everyone call him. Horse and I were buddies, mainly due to equal parts self-preservation and edgy teen nihilism that simply wanted to release his special brand of unhinged out into the world. He was the friend you made because it was not a matter of if he got sent to jail, but when. And you'd really rather not have your name be part of that headline. This wasn't to say that Horse was a bad dude. Talking to him was pretty chill for the most part, and I genuinely enjoyed our time together. But you got the vibe that there was this underlying problem going untreated. A nice enough dude if you were friends. Didn't even really ever argue with people, but if you wronged him, then you might as well skip the country and change your name. Horse didn't deal in an eye for an eye. He wanted your teeth, eyes, and maybe a few fingers while he was at it. Horse also bought a wild animal off of someone at school. This is unrelated to the story at hand, but I feel it paints a picture of just the kind of impulsive teenage boy who purchases a wild animal that another teenager clearly just found somewhere outside and brought to school, all without having a single clue of how to care for it. I'm going to leave what type of animal unspecified, as it was the same as his nickname, but we'll say that it was a dog-sized herbivore that lived uncaged in his bedroom floor for several years. So, on to the story. Nice Dude came to school one day looking like he just got dragged behind a car for a few blocks. We're talking busted blood vessels in his eyes, scrapes and cuts, as well as several swollen bits on his face. He was, and still is I suppose, a very dark-skinned guy. So just how bruised he was, I can't tell you, but I was going to hazard the guess super. Normal friend reactions, including my own, were immediate concern, asking if he needed to go to the hospital, if he was alright, and what happened. Turns out, he had invited a few guys over to his place the night before to smoke weed, bought and paid for by him, and play video games. Upon seeing Nice Dude's apartment and all his fancy toys, they decided to repay his kindness by beating the ever-loving stuffing out of him and stealing his stuff. Rational friends told him to file a police report, to which he waved them off, not wanting to cause more issues, not to mention they'd been smoking. Less rational friends suggested he get a gun, which he also declined. Then comes the least rational person in our entourage. Horse had not been present during Nice Dude's explanation of the night before. Being a chaotic nexus of violent urges shaped like a teenage boy, he needed his sleep, and a lot of it. So he never arrived at school less than an hour late. So he stumbles in as we're moving to a new class, takes one look at Nice Dude and asks a single question. Who did it? Nice Dude, being a nice guy who hadn't even wanted police intervention, sure as heck wouldn't sick Horse on these idiots. So he made up some lie about having a concussion and not remembering. Horse didn't buy it and spends the rest of his day up Nice Dude's butt, demanding to know the exact names of everyone involved. Nice Dude eventually buckles, reluctantly naming each of the poor idiots who would likely eventually wish they had gone to the cops instead. Of course, first came violent retribution, Horse's favorite kind. Being an absolutely huge dude with no regard for his own safety and well-being and less regard for others, he was a pretty intimidating guy. He spent the rest of the day skipping out on his classes, hunting down each of the guys involved and beating them, quote, until my hands felt wet. Security stepped in once or twice, handling him with the same bored exasperation they face all of our school's problems with. We went to a painfully underfunded school with lots of gang/drugs/alcohol/pregnancy problems. And so the security swiftly stopped caring about their jobs, and if you couldn't guess, Horace was a bit of a problem student. The security asked him, "Horace, what do you think you're doing?" "They stole from my friend." Security just gave a deep, exasperated sigh, clearly understanding that they can do nothing about a clear violation of the law of the land, and that the slight Horace had faced demanded swift and extrajudicial retaliation. But also, they did sort of get paid to make sure that these idiot kids didn't Lord of the Flies themselves out of the gene pool all the time, so some sort of compromise needed to be made for the sake of keeping their jobs. "Just don't send them to the hospital, okay?" It was a gentleman's agreement, to which Horace obliged. Maybe out of respect for the security guards who dealt with his stunts, or maybe because his knuckles were bleeding and that kinda sucked. Either way, there was a world of options for making their lives a living hell, and Horace intended to explore as many as he could. At least until they broke and took his ultimatum. "Give my friends his stuff back, or I won't stop." But they had all weathered a beating. They were high on teenage hubris and also probably weed. What's the worst you could do? Which is an incredibly stupid question to ask about a guy who once begged me to touch the bone poking out of his broken arm. I was crying more than he was. He proceeded to make the next few weeks hell. There was of course the petty things. Knocked their lunch out of their hands, swiped homework, locked one of them in the boiler room. Pretty much, if you can imagine a bully from an 80s movie doing it, short of vehicular homicide, what the flip Goonies, he did it. Then came the heavier stuff. Brought in his dad's bolt cutters. Like I said, security was hot garbage in this school. Alas, only ever watched the front doors, leaving the side doors free to sneak in and out of. And snapped the locks off 2 of their lockers, as one of them used a master lock. Then proceeded to clear out their stuff. Textbooks, an iPod, which I now own, gym clothes, anything he could get his hands on would be swiped. The valuables would be kept, but things he didn't care about were usually ripped up and left in the hall to be discovered later, along with the broken lock. Their cars were his favorite target by far. He stole their hubcaps, slashed their tires, left deep scratches along the side of their cars. One had a dick scratched into their passenger door. At one point, he borrowed my tire iron to straight up remove one of their car tires and roll it off into the nearby park where he dished it in a patch of dry fenced off scrub that hadn't been burned back, which would be a real fun discovery for the park department, I'm sure. He had entertained the idea of getting a skunk into one of their cars, but gave up when he realized we live in a city and he had no idea of where to get or how to transport a skunk. Backpacks were snatched as well, mostly dumped in the ladies' locker room showers with the water on, though he did light one on fire if memory serves. Textbooks were free unless you ruined them, and then you had to pay out of pocket, and our school was very generous with what ruined meant. Covers fell off, fine. All the pages are drawn on, whatever. But the whole book was destroyed, well, they couldn't do anything for you and had to order a new one on your dime. He tried to tell a teacher that one of them had cheated off him, but given his scholastic history, that was quickly tossed out as dumb, and sit back down, Horace. The final nail in the coffin was ruining a senior's relationship with the girl he'd been dating since freshman year. So Horace had quite a few lady friends on account of being a very large, intimidating guy who would take any excuse, like perhaps a pretty girl complaining about a creep, to start a fight. Needless to say, they were keen on helping him out. One girl I'll call Praying Mantis decided to help in his crusade. She managed to finesse dick pics out of our hapless senior. Of course, he had a girlfriend, but he was also a very horny teenager, and Praying Mantis was a very pretty girl. She sweet-talked him all the way out of his pants and then proceeded to send every photo to his girlfriend and spin a tale about how she had been blowing him for 6 months now. How she hadn't known that he had a girlfriend and she felt so bad. Of course, teenage girls are kinda dumb, and Praying Mantis got called a slut and a jerk and all sorts of other names. But come the next day, we still find that cheating senior very much dumped. After about a month or so of non-stop abuse, Horace never really felt an obligation to go to class, so he could spend all his free time on revenge if need be. Teachers just passed him with D's to get him out of their classes. He reminded them of his ultimatum. That evening, lo and behold, Nice Dude got a knock on his door and his muggers were back, this time with most of his things in tow. They didn't return everything. I believe a few games and a Blu-ray player were not returned, but Nice Dude lied and told Horse he got everything back for the sake of ending his rampage. I do want to say that Horse faced some sort of punishment for his many crimes. However, over his career as my friend, he informed me of so many suspensions, detentions, and extra work that he never planned to do that it all sort of blended together after a while. And I can't tell you how long he was out of school. But I can say that he was a junior both my junior and senior years. So the comments are roughly divided between being like, man, I wish I had a friend like Horse, and speculating as to what that animal could have been. The most popular conclusions are that it was either a pig or a goat. And in either case, it really helps paint the picture that this dude was flippin' nuts. Our next Reddit post is from Seattle Martini. And as a warning before we get into this story is about date rape. When people ask, what's the worst thing you've ever done, my mind instantly loads the following story into memory, but I've never shared it. Until now. Obligatory background. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest to an entertainment industry family. I spent a lot of my formative years on the road touring. It was a deceptively conservative life. When I was around 8 or 9 years old, I witnessed a jazz sax player from a band that my dad had booked shoot up and drop dead. This really drove home just say no. I played music all through school and started working professionally at a young age. I was pretty much straight edge until college. I got around to reading some Hunter S. Thompson and decided that a bong hit wasn't going to kill me. A few years out of school, around 1991, I started a small indie dance label and recording studio. This was back before every kid with a laptop could record in their bedroom. Anyhow, my company headquarters became a favorite hangout for local rave promoters and club kids. I became pretty well connected in that scene. I started experimenting with more and more types of party drugs, and subsequently found myself with friends who were either major dealers or dealer adjacent. In this clique, there were 3 or 4 dudes who would be considered douchebags. You know the type: fake tan, steroids, bleached hair, nice cars, etc. There was this one dude in particular whom I always got a bad vibe from. As a young man in my 20s, I liked passionate hugging as much as the next guy, if not more. But even when I was out clubbing looking to get laid, I never pushed my agenda, never used coercion, guilt, etc. to manipulate a woman into bed. If I spent $300 on dinner, I never felt like they owed me anything. The only expectation I had was if you make the date, show up, which is just good manners. Anyhow, back to the douchebag. Let's call him Tyler. This guy had a great sense of humor, the kind of good looks that make straight boys say, man, money, and a politically connected family. During the time I owned my label, I also played in jazz clubs in our city. One of the venues was this really cool martini bar. One of the bartenders was this super cute, bubbly, bright, and just downright fun girl. I met her in the rave scene, but got to know her through my jazz gig. She was super flirty, but was super old-fashioned. I'm not saying she was waiting for marriage, but close. She had grown up in a really small town and never really encountered bad people in her daily life, so she was quite trusting. This all changed when she was date raped by Tyler. He played the long con with this lovely human being. She had very little experience with drugs and intercourse when she went out with him. He got her whacked out on MDMA, did some pretty messed up things to her, had a buddy take photos, and violate her too. She was never the same after that. PTSD, self-loathing, depression. It was as if he killed her. Tyler told her that she had blacked out and didn't remember being into it, and peppered her with the typical BS along the lines of, I don't have to force myself on anybody, I get all the girls I want. Along with, nobody will believe you, and even if they did, there's no way I'll get arrested, etc. Personally, I was bullied a lot as a kid, and I can take a lot of stuff and not blink an eye. But when somebody hurts someone I care about, I tend to lean towards an asymmetrical response. Ironically, Tyler was not a consumer of drugs nor excessive alcohol. This factors into things later. I spoke to 2 people about my plan. One was a major drug trafficker, the other was a member of state law enforcement. The Cliff Notes version of the retribution was, I purchased about $3,500 worth of heroin in prepackaged and ready-to-retail baggies. I also got about 10 sheets of really powerful blotter acid. Tyler was attending a birthday party at a restaurant where I knew the valet staff really well. Well, not that well, but I was always an over-the-top kind of tipper. They knew me, knew I knew Tyler, etc. I told them I wanted to pull a prank on them and put something in his car. I slipped the guy a C note and told him it was harmless and wouldn't come back on him, so he agreed. I put the contraband under his passenger seat, gave the keys back, and took off. Tyler was a creature of habit and always took the same route home. My friend, the state trooper, didn't know what I was up to. I simply told him this dude who hangs around my circle of friends was becoming a major drug dealer and is putting my friends in danger. I told him the where and when and left him to his own devices. Around 1:20 a.m., Tyler gets pulled over and my friend does a DUI check. Tyler went ballistic because he was stone cold sober. The trooper asks if he can search the car. Tyler agrees because he knows his car is clean. He gets arrested for possession, intent to distribute, and the legally concealed pistol in his car didn't help either. If he hadn't been such an unfettered butthole, he would have gotten away with no jail time. But he was disrespectful to the judge and got 18 months in prison. Not jail, prison. He really was a moron. Instead of keeping his head down, shutting the hell up and doing his time, he acted like a douchebag and ended up getting killed. I didn't mean for the revenge to go that far, but I don't feel remorse for how things played out one bit. I hope this rapist rots in hell. So while I was reading this, I was thinking to myself, a year and a half in prison, that sounds more like pro-revenge than nuclear revenge. And then I read the rest of the sentence. Our next Reddit post is from Sanity Contagion. My aunt was an intensive care nurse at a hospital in Texas for 30 years. This is her story. A while back, my aunt tells me and my cousins this story, probably as a warning about drinking, I guess. For years, Mrs. Smith would come into my aunt's ER, battered and bruised. Apparently, sometimes quite severely. The woman was getting up there in years and had almost monthly visits that sometimes required her to stay for a week or more. A quick rundown of some of the injuries I recall. Broken pelvis, explained by falling downstairs in her one-story home. Broken arms and wrists, explained as falling out of her car. A shattered orbital bone in her eye socket, no explanation I can recall. A series of broken ribs with various excuses. Lastly, this moron broke her back, which required fusing 3 of her vertebrates. Driveway car accident. So, Mr. Smith is appropriately qualified as a total piece of garbage. On the end of my aunt's 12-hour shift, the call comes in from the ambulance that they're bringing in a 70-year-old Smith. Faces fell. Everyone gets somber knowing that Mrs. Smith probably won't survive the night due to the years of beatings she's already endured. The emergency room calls the ambulance back, asking for a description of the injury so the operating room can be somewhat prepared. What they heard on the radio pissed everyone off. The paramedics were completely unprofessional. They were laughing their butts off as they described broken arm, broken leg, and lacerated scalp. When the ambulance pulls up, my aunt and several other ER staff are trying to read them the riot act. Instead, Mrs. Smith primly stepped out of the ambulance. The paramedics pull the stretcher out of the ambulance and wheel her husband inside. Enough is enough. Apparently, that's all she said. The paramedics had to fill in the rest of the story, so here it is. Mr. Smith came home drunk one last time, and she wrapped him in a blanket and beat him with a cast iron frying pan. Mr. and Mrs. Smith never came back to the ER. Maybe he learned. Then, Jedi Bell shares this down in the comments. My great aunt did that. Told me her husband beat her once. She told him if he ever did that again, he would regret it. Several months later, he got drunk and he beat her. She pretended to be apologetic and made him breakfast. Invited him to sit at the kitchen table. While he was sitting at the table and prepared to eat, she took her cast iron frying pan and beat him unconscious. He was unconscious for 2 days on the floor of her kitchen. 2 full effing days. When he finally came to, she stood over him with a frying pan and told him if he ever tried that stuff again, she'd bash his brains in and kill him. He never touched her again. He apologized, and they were married for 60 years until he died. She's in her 90s, and I laugh every time she tells this story. Then OP replies, "That's the beauty of cast iron. Brilliant." That was rSlash and if you like this content, then hit that subscribe button because I put out new Reddit videos every single day.